I'm speaking to you from the traditional lands of the Secwepemc and the Silks and the Ktunaxa peoples in Nelson, British Columbia. But we are all meeting on Indigenous lands, and we just want to acknowledge that our recognition of the contributions of Indigenous peoples must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in your communities. As we begin to introduce ourselves, I'd invite you to actually in the chat box, list where you're from. And if you know the names of the Indigenous lands that you're on, you can mention that in the chat box as well. We're going to start by just introducing ourselves and then moving into a presentation from the City of Edmonton on the Recover initiative. And then we'll have time for discussion and some closing announcements. So just a quick introduction in the chat box, if you could just include your name, your location, if you know the traditional lands that you're on, you can write that down, your organization, and one word to describe your experience with social innovation. If you've had any experience using social innovation methodologies or tools in your neighborhood work, you can include that as well. And we'll just invite everyone to write a little message in the chat and see who's on the call here today. So today we have two speakers that have joined us from the City of Edmonton, and I'm just going to briefly introduce them. So we have Susan Coward is the branch manager of Integrated Strategic Development with the City of Edmonton's Citizen Services Department. She's spent 8 years in the city manager's office working with 3 city managers and has learned a lot about the many different business areas and unique challenges in that role. Prior to that, she worked as a neighborhood director in different geographical areas and got to learn about and apply community development and public engagement. She's currently on a steep learning curve with Recover, improving urban wellness, and is enjoying the journey. And Sue Holsworth is the project manager for Recover. Sue has also worked as a land use and policy planner for 3 local governments, as well as a project manager for Planning Academy, a public education initiative, and as the Winter City Manager for Edmonton's broad and holistic Winter City strategy. To all her work, she brings a learning mindset and a system lens. So welcome to you both. We're so grateful that you could take the time to share this incredible work that you've been engaging in with Recover, and just very eager to hear more about the initiative and what learning you're taking from it and how we might be able to glean some of that and apply it to our own work. So I'll pass it over to you. And again, just much gratitude for your taking the time today.
Thanks very much for having us. Okay, so again, thanks for having us. Sue and I will share the presentation, and it's really important to let you know that while we're talking about Recover, we do have a team, and it's because of all of the hard work of the team that we've been able to learn and try out Recover. So here's a little background about how Recover got created. And in 2017, Recover was created in response to tensions in our downtown and our core neighborhoods over a high concentration of social services. And at the same time when all of this was boiling up was the time when the City of Edmonton was working to get supervised consumption sites into the core of the city. So many of the residents and businesses were quite concerned because they felt having all these social services in one area, even though they're compassionate people, was keeping people away from using their businesses. So that's where Recover started, and City Council wanted Recover to be about urban wellness for people living on the margins, as well as in the communities where marginalized people live. It's important to point out that Recover is in our City of Edmonton corporate business plan, and you can see it circled there under a goal of healthy city. And as well, we just had our municipal development plan, city plan, approved by council, and Recover also fits within the big city move called inclusive and compassionate. To give you a little background of what our journey has been, was in 2018, somebody, or late 2017, somebody said, you know, you should develop an urban wellness plan using social innovation, to which many of us said, what's that? So we started on this social innovation journey in 2017. It was the first time we had done ethnography with marginalized people. And then we did prototyping and testing. And so 2018 was really about trying social innovation to see, did it actually improve well-being, urban wellness? In 2019, we continued on with our social innovation process, and we built our own internal capacity. Plus, we started partnering with some post-secondary so that they could help us with innovation coaches and some of that kind of work. And then at the end of 2019, we said, are we really improving well-being, or are we more focused on a social innovation process? So in 2020, Sue's going to explain it. We took all the research we had done over the 2 years, and we decided we're going to change course here. We're going to focus more on well-being. What is it? And how do we design for well-being? So that's where we are right now. And that's the story we're going to talk to you about today. We also knew that we had to be more intentional in incorporating Indigenous perspectives and Indigenous concepts of well-being in our work. We invited a local consulting firm called Neighbourhood to help us with this. And Neighbourhood has developed 4 principles to guide our work and recover. So deepening understanding of layers of place, self-location as a basis for settler ethics, ethical space making and supporting ethical space taking, and finally, aspiring to have two-eyed seeing, recognizing Indigenous peoples have unique and complete knowledge sets, well suited to healing wounds and creating thriving communities. So this is brand new for us, and we'll be sharing this with our City Council on December 2nd. So we hear a lot about the need for more safety, more services, for better integration, more coordination. So that's on the left-hand side. And we feel like in Edmonton, when you look at the provincial government, you look at city services, you look at social services, a lot of the conversation is about alignment, coordination, making sure people are safe. And we're going to talk to you today that Recover feels like we're on the right-hand side. We're around nourishing, around healing, around purpose, meaning. And so that's kind of our unique space for Recover. So Sue's going to tell you a little bit more about what we've learned and where we're going.
So about the course setting work that Susan mentioned, we commissioned a firm called In With Forward to do that for us. And they reviewed all our data, and most especially the data from the ethnographic research that they also did for us. And they put together this interactive PDF called The Soulful City. Right now it lives on their website, but I know you have the link to our current website. It's in the midst of being completely revamped. So stay tuned. In about a week, it'll be completely different, and this will be there as well. Anyways, this interactive PDF explains what we really mean by urban wellness and how it comes together to inform our framework for well-being. So in terms of the ethnographic research, In With Forward got to know 59 street-involved Edmontonians, people like Brandon, Renee, and William. So they shadowed them, they walked alongside them, spent a whole day or more with each of them, really understanding what their stressors and pain points were, as well as their motivations and aspirations. And when getting to know them, they asked them what matters most. And those with next to nothing can really hone in quickly. And there was a surprisingly shared conception of what it actually means to live well or be well. And it didn't have a lot to do with money or really anything in the material world. Yes, it's often a significant barrier if you don't have money or housing, those sorts of things. And it creates stress for sure, but it is not the top desired outcome. So the things that really stood out in terms of mattering the most were a sense of purpose, a feeling of respect, and a sense of connection. And for the Indigenous folks that they spent time with, respect was often the number one thing that people said their lives were needing. For non-Indigenous folks, it was similar, but respect was replaced with safety and security. It could also, keep in mind that could be in the psychological sense, but both purpose and connection remain constant in terms of the things that people saw their lives needing. So In With Forward also took a deep dive into the literature. They spent time, they went philosophical and reviewed 3,000 years worth of traditions from Indigenous to Eastern and Western, and more contemporary interdisciplinary thinking. And across almost all the traditions, wellness was about things like love, harmony, and balance. And what was absent from most of the traditions was anything to do with money, status, or power. So this led us to the conclusion that wellness really is a relational phenomenon, that it's about something about connection within and beyond self. And I'm sure you're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, with basic human needs at the bottom. The implication, it's implicit that you address those first before you get to higher order human needs. And many of our systems are set up that way with that understanding. Interestingly enough, Maslow never intended it to be a hierarchy. He actually saw all the needs as equivalent or interrelated. And what's clear from the research and from the traditions that wellness really isn't a hierarchical concept. So instead of thinking about wellness where basic human needs gain priority over higher order ones, we think we should be thinking about them together, so that it's like not about food or meaning, but about nourishment. It's about how the way they come together. Currently in our Edmonton landscape, there's a lot of solutions that are focusing exclusively on basic human needs. There's some that are, you know, on the right in the red bubble or circle, and some that are doing a good job of both, and we applaud that, and just we want to see more of it. Susan?
So, yeah. So Recover is about rebalancing these 4 scales, as we think they have gotten out of whack. And when we talk about the rebalancing, we're by no means saying that we should throw away all the good work that's on the left-hand side right now. We just feel like there needs to be more effort put on the right-hand side. So let's take language. I don't know if you're like this in Edmonton, but whenever we refer to street involved people or people living on the margins, they're always called vulnerable people. And whenever we talk about you know, people congregating downtown or loitering, we call it social disorder. And we really believe there needs to be a change in language, where we need to talk more about the resilience, the strength, and all the good things that street involved people are doing. As far as the new solutions, they're often focused, and again, I'm with government, on programs, services, buildings, benefits, and we think more time needs to be spent on solutions that change routines, change up interactions, create new roles. And a lot of our stuff is about interactions with community, which I think fits well with the work that you do. As far as problems, they're often framed as material, and we believe there should be no more non-material. You know, the fact that there's not connection to land and ground, people don't get to be with their friends and families, like these non-material higher order needs. And then knowledge is often expressed as rational and empirical. And we believe there needs to be different kinds of knowledge, which will come from, and we'll explain a little bit, the work that we do with ethnography and prototyping and learning. So Recover now has a more focused approach, and we are asking the above key questions going forward. So when we talk about Recover, we keep saying to people, we're trying to do a culture shift. We're trying to talk about well-being differently. And so these questions are about rebalancing the 4 scales I just talked about. It's not an either or, but a both and. And I like to think of it as zipping things together. We can also think of weaving the material and the non-material elements together. So I don't know, when we talk about theory of change, one of the things we often start with is what are we moving from and what are we moving to? So this is kind of a snapshot. And so we are believing that there needs to be a movement from always individual and government responsibility for well-being to the whole community being responsible for well-being. That being connected to professional help only, to being connected to professional help and back to community. Services based, the material needs, services based on meals, emergency and permanent housing versus services that support or connect people to new relationships, their own sense of practices, new relationships, time, and nature. Community is great right now at engaging through charitable acts, really important. But we also believe, and later if you want to hear about a current prototype, we believe community needs to be connected through acts of reciprocity and shared learning, where they get as much from having a relationship with a marginalized person as that marginalized person gets from that person. So again, when we're focusing on solutions currently, we often talk about the needs of the people, the deficits that we're trying to overcome with our services. And we think there should be more framing about well-being as building capabilities. And then the last thing is moving from well-being through settler eyes to creating spaces for Indigenous ways of knowing, along with non-Indigenous. So Sue will run you through the well-being framework.
Right. So this brings us to the framework, and these are the target outcomes that are at the core, at the heart of the framework. It's these 6 kinds of connection. Connection to land and ground, connection to body and self, to family, friends, and community, to the sacred, however you might define that, to culture, and to the human project, which is one's ability to grow and develop and realize their potential. Now, these dots in the pastel ring are examples of what those types of connections might look or feel like. So they're examples of behaviors or attitudes. So for example, connection to land and ground might be having feelings of being at home or celebrating the seasons. Connection to family or friends might be having expressions of love and care. And connection to the human project might be having moments of learning. Not an exhaustive list here, just a smattering to give you an idea. Now, this is the whole framework altogether. Now, this outer ring in black and white are the tools for change. They're the levers we can pull to get at the outcomes at the center. And they correspond to systems or cultural change levers. So at the top is frames and narratives. That's like the underlying mental models that underpin a system. Laws, regulations, and incentives. So what's rewarded, punished, or incentivized. Roles and resources can be traditional ones like, I don't know, researchers and social workers, designers, but also less traditional ones like peer roles, for example, or roles for artists or gardeners or, you know, anyways, all kinds of things. Interactions and environments, that's the space or place-based lever. So who's in a space, what's in the space, how do you move through it, when, all those sorts of things. Routines and repertoires, those are the repeating patterns. So what reoccurs over time. For example, what might you celebrate in a space? Knowledge and meaning, what are you paying attention to? What are you like monitoring, measuring, reporting on? What makes it into for example, council reports. So all those levers, they can impact on any of the outcomes at the center. So they're not meant to be static. They can move. But we're using this framework to help us really think through our interventions that we're working on. Like, what outcomes are we really aiming for? What levers are we pulling? Is it the best match? What other levers might we pull? And then it's also giving us clues on how we might evaluate as well. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Susan.
Here's an example of a worksheet that we use. So when someone comes to us with a problem, on the inverted triangle, we ask them, well, where do you think the problem is stuck right now? And so you can see that at the policy or practice level, or the relationship power dynamics, or at the mental models. And so it takes a bit of conversation to say where they think it is most stuck. And then we always say, well, what lever are you using right now to try to unstick this problem? And so I find fairly easily people are able to go to which of the levers, and they're often using multiple levers. But they're talking to us because the problem is not going away. And so often there's a conversation, well, if you were to use a different lever, what would that be? And so we start talking about that. And so when they come up with different levers, that starts getting you thinking about, well, what is it we think we want to prototype and test to see if, in fact, our hunch is right or our assumption is right. So that's an example of a worksheet that we're using right now with our well-being framework. Okay, and then I think we're almost done. And then we'll answer the questions and we'll talk, yeah, what is a lever? This is just to show you a picture. We think of ourselves, because we're a small group of 4 people in the city of Edmonton, and we work with partners, we think of Recover being a platform. So our North Star at the center is our well-being framework. But to work towards the outcomes and the well-being framework, we need to provide resources. And we've talked a bit about the data and learning, because we have to have ethnography, understand the user experience. It's about telling stories. If we want a culture change, how do we start describing well-being differently? We have partners where we come together and work on something. And later, if you want to see a prototype, we'll talk about a connector role that involves 3 partners. We do have partnerships. We have a Recover Catalyst group that helps us make sense of this work. The research and design work, because as you know from innovation, you got to have a strong research and design approach. And then finally, we're not a platform that implements programs. There's always got to be new ways of working. There's always got to be someone to hand it off and put more investment into. So that's kind of our platform in a nutshell. And that's it. Thank you. So Sue, I don't know if you want to turn off the presentation and then we can, yeah.
Thank you so much. That was extremely inspiring and incredible to see the depth to which you've been able to articulate your understanding of well-being. I'll kick it off with a question. How do you see going about doing that culture change of being able to broaden out your team of 4's understanding of well-being throughout the city? How does that happen? What's the process to shift the city's understanding of well-being as a whole?
That's a really hard question to answer. But I mean, we're starting with baby steps. We've been socializing our well-being framework, asking people if it resonates, what the rubs might be, how they see it being applied. We're developing, we just got some great advice from the Assistant Deputy Minister, who was instrumental in applying a GBA plus lens across the province. And she said that it really started to resonate and gain traction in terms of impacting on culture when they developed the tools. And she had tools to share. And so that is a focus of ours as well. We will be working on that. Susan, do you want to add something?
Yeah, it's so hard. And that's why I said culture change, because I work for the city of Edmonton, and municipalities are about delivering programs and services. And so I'm saying to my colleagues, we need to deliver less programs and services, and we need to figure out how to engage the community in relationships with marginalized people so we can all heal and grow together. And so for the most part, they go, that sounds great, but that's never going to work. And so we've gone the city council route. We've had one-on-one meetings with our city councilors. We've met up with community organizations who are what we would call early adopters. And so we're trying right now to really talk to people who can share this vision and know it's going to be hard to change our mindset in North America, where we think professional services are really the route to go. So I have good days and I have bad days. My bad days, it's like, I can't do this anymore. And then the good days, yeah, we just have to keep going on and find more colleagues that want to be on this journey together.
Beautiful, thank you. Looks like we have a question in the chat. Maybe you can tackle that one. And in the meantime, I'll invite everyone else who has a camera and is comfortable to turn your camera on, just to create a nice community discussion environment, and we'll see where the discussion goes. Susan, do you want to answer this question? I see it says, if this started with a conflict with the businesses downtown, how many were included and have they been brought into the process?
Yeah, I would say this is one of the powerful outcomes of social innovation. So you'll notice we don't ever talk about social innovation when we talk about the well-being framework. And the reason we don't do that is people then start focusing in on process, and we want them to focus on outcomes. But back to when we really were learning about social innovation, we ran workshops with business, community residents, with agency service providers. And it wasn't hard to engage businesses because what we did was we focused on the information we gathered in each step of the innovation process. So when the ethnography information came out and people started reading about, seeing this is what Al is about, these are Al's dreams, these are what stresses Al. Every step of the way, I think we would run like 4 or 5 workshops in the year where it's understanding the people at the center, sense making, prototyping. The businesses came along quite well because it was a different conversation between the agencies, the businesses, and the residents. So that's how we kind of brought business along. Did it improve well-being? No, but it did build bridges between some of the businesses and the service providers for the marginalized people.
One of our early prototypes was called Socially Conscious Businesses, and that one was taken over by one of the prime socially conscious businesses in our city called the Nook and Reach, the Council for Safety in Edmonton. And they've been running with it, and they're trying to create a socially active business network now that includes mentoring and raising awareness and a whole host of things. It's probably too broad, but they're working on that and trying to engage partners. Just this morning, I had a meeting with managers of one of the malls just out on the edge of downtown or Oliver neighborhood. And they're worried about issues in and around their mall and how to address them. And they don't want to use traditional kind of approaches that they're used to that are, based on, visible deterrence to make, and actually this was words I heard in the meeting, to make good people feel safe. And policing and enforcement, they really want to move to a much more inclusionary, empathetic approach. And so anyways, we're including businesses as opportunities arise as well. Our Downtown Business Association is actively sponsoring one of our prototypes that's continuing from last year. And it's a place-based one, just near our city center mall. So they're involved in a number of different ways here and there.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. So perhaps you could talk about those four points you had mentioned at the beginning: layers of place, self-location, ethical space making, and toward seeing a little bit more. How are you putting those into practice? Or I'm just curious to know how those have informed the different elements of your framework and your approach.
Well, you asked a tough question because we are just learned about it in the last couple of weeks. We've been working with the consultant. And so what we've been starting with is trying to understand what they mean. And we really haven't, we're on that journey right now to figure out how does it become the way we work. So I'm sorry to say I can't give you any insight. Sue, you might have more.
We're reflecting on that now for sure. And we're starting right now just as a team with the self-location piece, really to talk about where we're coming from and recognizing how we see ourselves and the opportunities we have and how that informs the way we go about our work. In Edmonton, even just talking about how do we refer to Edmonton, is it Amiskwichi, Waskahegan? Edmonton has, from what I understand, like about 6 different place names that were given to it. Layers of history here. And just really deepening our understanding of that. There's just, I don't know. That's a tough one. We're going to grapple with it, and it's not going to happen overnight. And I think it's going to, our consultant has advised us that we can't just go out and read a book and suddenly say we're too wide, that it'll happen over time through relationships mainly, being really mindful as we go.
So maybe before we finish off, we could show you a current prototype that we're working on right now. And it is a partnership between In With Forward. If you have a chance, if you haven't looked at their website, In With Forward, all one word, they've got some interesting information. Edmonton Police, REACH, which is like a community safety, the city funds it, but it's like its own entity. And we've got funding from the McConnell Foundation. So we pooled our money together and we're working on a prototype using our well-being framework. And just to set it up, in Edmonton, there's a service called 24/7 Crisis Diversion. And what happens is when people see someone who's kind of in distress or they're causing trouble, rather than calling the police, they call this 24/7 Crisis Diversion. And so these are people, and so last year about this time, In With Forward came out and they did ethnography with the heavy users of 24/7. So these are people that are constantly in a crisis state. And the hypothesis was the reason that these people keep getting put in crisis, that they're getting picked up, is they're not connected to services. So maybe we need to create a connector role that connects them to a service. And then when they did the ethnography, they found that these people were connected to more services than anyone. So there went that hypothesis. So why is it that people were not getting themselves out of this crisis state? So now, what's the next slide, Sue? I can't remember.
There we go.
Okay. So they've been doing design work. They've been testing it, just the concepts with marginalized people and with people like me. They've got 3 concepts that we're looking to pick one to prototype. So one idea is a new role called a morning midwife. The names will probably change, but this is someone, it helps someone, because a lot of people who are street involved have immense feelings of grief and loss. So a morning midwife, a new role. Another is a garden host. And so what that one is it connects a marginalized person with someone like me who likes gardening, and we have a reciprocal relationship where I learn as much from that person about what their knowledge of plants and whatever as they learn from me. And it gets at the well-being, the outcome of land and ground, purpose, the human project that we talked about. And then a final concept is the term alchemist. And really this is around using art and place as a sense of healing. And the concept is that for a number of these folks that have been living on the street for a long time, different places in Edmonton have different meanings for them. And part of their healing is to be able to draw and create an understanding of what that space meant in their experience. So this is an example of, so we're down to almost picking one of these concepts, and we will start doing the prototyping and testing from January to March of next year. Sue, did you want to add anything?
I'd just say that all 3 of these ideas, they don't rely on professionals or on services. They're all about connecting in community and connecting across difference and helping people to kind of navigate discomfort and build reciprocal relationships. It's about blurring the lines between helper and who's being helped.
We even think that if some of this starts to take hold, community members do start to get engaged and really feel they get as much from being engaged with this person in the activity. I think down the road, things like siting of affordable housing units and, all the things we grapple with in the city because people don't want those people in their neighborhoods. I think we're going to start to have different conversations over time. Mental models will switch. I don't know how long that will take or how people will even react to this, but this is the route we're going down.
How does a garden host work in a
It's
winter
really
season?
exciting.
I see that question. That's a good question. And I think the initial assumption was that it wouldn't, but I think if you reframe it as a nature host, I think it could work year round. There's, you know, for the paper kind of version of prototyping that the core team did, that they went out and, you know, met with marginalized folks wherever they were hanging out, like at the big shelter downtown. The one of the images they reacted to the most wasn't actually, you know, gardening the way you think of it in the summer. It was just going for a nature walk together. That can be done year round, and there's a lot of other things that can work year round for sure.
I guess the other thing I would add to that is being a city government, at least in Edmonton, we run a lot of facilities. We have nurseries.
An equestrian center.
Equestrian center. So if we've got this beautiful river valley and an equestrian center, if there was a prototype or a new way of interacting and where it was about connection to land and ground and animal, we've got a place where people can go. So we're having to start to rethink about how we use all these assets other than trying to generate revenue. I know it's not that cut and dry, but.
Howard, I see you on the call. We're working with Deb Jakovic right now to co-host a participatory cities symposium. It'll be in March. Because there's so many links between abundant communities and this and participatory cities.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I'm wondering about the role of newcomers, and you've centered Indigenous perspectives in your framework, and I'm wondering if you looked at sort of the newcomer experience in Edmonton and how that might inform your approach to cultivating well-being and bringing in different approaches, particularly looking at sort of newcomers, you know, establishing home and connection and sense of community. Just wondering if that has come up in your discussions at all.
We haven't focused on that at all. As you can see, we really have, our ethnography has been with marginalized people who tend to use our shelter spaces and all those kinds of services. Not to say, I mean, we hope that different organizations will look at the well-being framework and see how it can fit with their views of the outcomes they think are important to support. So we haven't gone there, but you know, if they ever approached us and said, can we learn together or try applying this to a newcomer, we would certainly have that conversation. I suppose one other thing I will say is you're interested in this because I think the theme is around social innovation. And one thing I have learned, especially with our politicians and kind of more traditional organizations, there's a lot to happen to explain what prototyping is. And so people will go to an app when they think of prototyping, or they'll think that if the prototype failed and you iterated and did it over and over again and you learned a lot but it failed, that you didn't do a good job. And so that's the other thing I've learned, is explaining that prototyping is an amazing learning opportunity with the people you're trying to impact or make a difference. And so that's a culture change as well. And the other thing is, people will often say to me, whenever we say prototyping, they'll go, oh, you're piloting. No, it's not a pilot. A prototype is a series of practices that you're trying to use to see if you can make a difference. These series of practices, which prove promising, get pieced together and they eventually can become a pilot. So that's the other thing. I don't know if folks that are doing this work, if you're finding there's a bit of confusion about what prototyping is, what success is, what failure is.
Perhaps you could talk a little bit about your evaluation approach. so much of what you have in the framework, for example, expressions of love, expressions of identity, feelings at home, so much of it are these intangible things. How are you approaching that conversation around capturing evaluation impact?
Well, we started with using the social determinants of health pretty much, or these 5 indicators that are very closely aligned with those. And then we decided we're going to focus on 3 of those that we thought were the most important. And then we thought we'll use them as we're not going to see them actually change, but we'll use them as our North Stars. And then we'll, anyways, we have now realized we can't use them at all. That we need to develop new ways to measure, to evaluate our impact. And we know it needs to be tied to the well-being framework. We don't know exactly what that's gonna be like, but that is the task, one of our top priorities for 2021.
Yeah, Christine, you're asking all the hard questions.
Yeah, you are.
To your point, we're going to our city council in 2 weeks to say, back in 2018, we promised that we would move the dial on these population level changes. We are wrong. The only way you can do population level change are massive community initiatives where there's lots of money and concurrent activities, and we're not that. And we have to come up with a completely new way to evaluate, where we evaluate if the person gets the behavioral outcomes that we hope they will. And so we're saying, again, we got to figure this out, and we'll come back to you in 2021 with what we found out. So that's where we are on evaluation.
So on December 2nd, again, we're going to have to tell City Council that we're not doing the measuring using those indicators, and that it isn't implementation failure, that it was an expectation failure. So we have to reset those expectations. I think tied to evaluation is going to be, what you pay attention to shows like what you're valuing and whose perspective counts. So this 2-eyed approach, this, is going to have to be making its way into evaluation as well.
One other practical point that we've learned since we've been at this for a couple of years is I still remember our city council said, go ahead and experiment. And we're okay with you failing as long as you learn. And kind of sit there and go, yeah, you're saying that, but do you really mean it? And, but what we've learned is it's so important to keep capturing the learnings in whether it's the ethnography profiles or the sense making when you start to generate ideas, or your prototyping results, to keep track of all of that and keep sharing it out so people can go along with you. And then when you do fail and some great hypothesis that you thought this could be amazing, and you find out you're totally wrong, at least people can see what you learned and what was wrong in your assumptions and all that sort of stuff. So that's the one thing. I don't think we kept the journey notes as much as we should have the first year, and now we're way better. And I think it's important, at least for the city, we're trying to put more of that information on our website so we can be totally transparent and people can come along with us, or they can give their opinion. So that's another learning that I don't think we talked about.
Oh, I was just going to say, there was a question from Dan about have we considered, or are we aware of developmental evaluation? So I responded in the chat, said very much so, that we've been working with Mark Cabage. And so it's not just to evaluate our prototypes, but to help plan as well what we're doing. And he's the one who's been advising us that we need to reset expectations around evaluation.
I was going to ask a question around sort of the role of bringing in external consultants and what you've learned from that, having them do the sort of depth of the ethnography work, or the work of putting together principles. Sort of what's the balance of bringing in a consultant yet still having the city go on the journey itself? What are your learnings around that?
Well, when, as I said earlier, when we decided in 2017 and to pursue 2018, when we told council we were going to take a social innovation approach, none of us really knew what that was. And we did help hire Mars Discovery District, because Alex Ryan had been in Alberta for a few years. He set up CoLab in Alberta. So it was really important for us because we had 4 motions and we had to make sure, because we were not subject matter experts about social innovation, we had to have someone with credibility and had done it before. So that's why we hired Alex Ryan.
And to teach
Alex,
us, because we didn't
what's
know
that?
anything. And to teach us.
And to teach us, yeah. And Alex Ryan was the one, because he knows kind of the innovation ecosystem, socially, he was the one that introduced us to In With Forward and said, I only know of one company that is specialized for ethnography with the disability community and people living in the margins. And so that's how we got on to In With Forward. And again, I mean, they've been doing this work with this particular population around the world for 10 years. And we did not have the depth. We still don't have the depth. We're slowly learning ethnography. With the design work, we're learning from them again. So you bring up a really good point is we have to build our own capacity. And so it's so important when you're working with a consultant who maybe has a track record, has done it before, that they have to want to take a collaborative capacity building approach and have you learn alongside with them. The goal is to not keep hiring this consultant year after year after year. It's to have them for a year or two until you have the, you know, in your team, or your partners, the capacity to do it yourself. So that's the kind of thinking we've been going through.
And they're the more and more, they're like coaches for us, really. And yeah, teaching us, helping us to really deepen our understanding and be able to apply, do the work better. Yeah.
All right, last chance, anyone who has a burning question. Now's your chance to ask. Otherwise, I'll just have a few wrap-up announcements.
I didn't feel like I answered this question properly. Did you specify the consultants had come from the area to ensure they put their work in context? No, we didn't. I think actually most of our consultants have been sole sourced, and it's because we've really gone after the people who we knew, like that we knew we needed, like that. For example, there is nobody else, I don't think, that does the same kind of work as In With Forward. Nobody else could have given us that same kind of support we needed with the kind of ethnographic research they do in particular. But they've all been excellent at putting their work in context here.
Well, thank you again for sharing your learning and for being so brave to kind of just share it at this stage. You haven't even shared the latest updates with council, and yet you're willing to share it with us here. So we really appreciate just your, sharing your learning journey with us and helping us to get a little glimpse at the incredible model and framework you're putting together. I think we all use these words of well-being a lot in community work, but we don't often take the time to go to the depths you have to say what it means. So really a lot of gratitude to you. And just an announcement, this will be our last community of practice for 2020. We will be releasing our schedule for the upcoming year. The next community of practice call will be the 3rd week of January, and we'll have a list of topics and dates on our website for everyone to see and to mark your calendars. We also have a webinar coming up on November 25th that you might be interested in on creating equitable and resilient places working alongside communities. So you can check that out on Tamarack's website. It's going to be a really fascinating discussion. And any final words, Sue or Susan?
Thank you. We really appreciate the opportunity to share with you. And I suppose we invite you to be in touch with us if you want to know more, or you have any thoughts or something that bothers you, anything like that. We're happy to continue the conversation.
Perfect.
Yeah, and just to add on to Sue, Christine, you said it well. I have to say, everyone, we've socialized our well-being framework, like those outcomes. Everybody has said this isn't new. It's just talked about differently. It might be 7 things. It might, like, this is not new. And we say you're right. It's not. I think what's kind of new is just the way we're trying to get to those outcomes. So I agree with you. Our well-being framework is nothing revolutionary. But to Sue's point, if you start working with it at all or trying the levers and designing, we're happy to bring more in and learn from each other. So please feel free to reach out if you would like to talk more.
Perfect. We'll share your contact information in the follow-up email along with the slides and the recording from today's session so that you can reference what we chatted about today. Thanks, everyone. Take care.